Adrian slammed the folder on the table. Cameron stood behind him, pretending to care. "It's just paperwork, Dad," they said. But I saw the logo, Westfield Nursing Home. My hand trembled, not from age, but rage. For years I saved other people's hearts. Now it was mine they wanted to bury. I am Miles Morris, 52 years old. Once I was a heart surgeon, a man who believed that skill and control could stop death even for a moment. Back then, my life beat in rhythm with the sound of hospital monitors, and when I came home, there was always Evelyn. She was a nurse, patient and calm, the kind of woman who could silence chaos with a smile. We met in a hospital hallway, both exhausted after a long shift. I remember saying, "You look like the only person here who still believes in miracles." She laughed. "Maybe I do, just not in surgeons." That laugh changed my life. We married 3 years later and built a small home outside the city. Nothing fancy, but full of warmth. A garden she tended, a piano she never finished learning, and a porch where we'd sit every evening, watching the light fade. She loved lilies, said they were proof that beauty could grow from dirt. I didn't understand it then. I do now. When Adrian was born, I was terrified to hold him. Evelyn whispered, "You've held a beating heart before, Miles. This one's just smaller." I laughed, shaking with joy instead of fear. Cameron came a few years later. Wild, funny, impossible not to love. Our home turned noisy, messy, alive. We weren't rich, but we were whole. Evelyn would wait up for me every night, no matter how late I finished surgery. Sometimes she'd bring me tea and say, "You look like you fought death again." I'd smile. Sometimes death wins. She'd touch my cheek. "Then fight harder tomorrow." I always did, because she believed I could. There was one rainy Sunday I still remember clearly. The boys were building forts out of pillows, Evelyn was baking, and I was at the piano pretending to play. She leaned over my shoulder, whispering, "You'll never learn that song." I said, "Then I'll keep trying." She smiled. "Good. That's why I married you." That moment, her voice, her warmth, it's the memory I hold onto when the nights get too long. Life felt endless then. Each morning began with her humming in the kitchen. Each night ended with her head resting on my shoulder. I thought forever was real. But forever ended on an ordinary day. A trip that should have been simple, a road slick with rain. One sound, one flash, one heartbeat, and everything went silent. When I woke in the hospital, my hands were shaking uncontrollably. They told me I survived. They told me Evelyn didn't. I remember staring at my fingers, the same ones that once held life steady, now trembling like broken instruments. And in that trembling, I understood what it meant to lose everything. People said I was lucky. Lucky to live, lucky to walk away. But I didn't walk away. I stayed behind, trapped in the emptiness she left. The house became a museum of ghosts. The smell of her perfume, the teacup still on the counter, the unfinished song on the piano. Every corner whispered her name. Sometimes, when the rain falls, I'd close my eyes and hear her laugh again. It's faint, but it's there. A reminder of the man I used to be, the life I once had, and the love that still refuses to die. I was a surgeon once. I saved hearts for a living, but the one that mattered most, I couldn't save. I woke up one morning and realized I couldn't stand the silence anymore. 10 years in this house, surrounded by ghosts, her perfume still faint in the curtains, her handwriting fading on old recipe cards. It felt like living inside a wound that refused to close. So over breakfast, I said the words I'd been rehearsing for months. "I'm selling the house." The air froze. Adrian looked up from his phone, frowning. "What did you just say?" "I'm going to sell it," I repeated quietly. "There's a small coastal town north of here. Peaceful, quiet." "I think it's time I start over." He put the phone down, his voice rising. "Dad, you can't do that. This land is about to be rezoned. Do you even know what it's worth?" "I'm not interested in what it's worth," I said. "Well, you should be," he snapped. "You have no idea how much you could lose." Cameron, sitting across the table, tried to soften his tone. "Hey, calm down. If Dad wants to move, maybe we can help with the paperwork. Adrian glared at him. Help him? He doesn't even know what he's doing. I watched them both, one burning with greed, the other pretending to care. And for the first time, I saw them not as my sons, but as strangers who wanted something from me. I just want peace, I said. That's all. Adrian shook his head, muttering, You're making a mistake. Cameron smiled thinly. Don't worry, Dad. I'll handle everything. Later that afternoon, Maya stopped by, as she often did, with her gentle knock and her homemade pies. She was carrying a small basket covered in a checkered cloth. I heard voices earlier, she said softly. Everything all right? I forced a smile. Just family matters. Ah, she chuckled. Those are always the hardest kind. We sat on the porch, watching the light fade. Maya poured tea and handed me a slice of her apple pie. You've been talking about leaving for months, she said. Maybe it's time. I'm tired, Maya, I admitted. This house doesn't feel like home anymore. It feels like a hospital room that never discharged me. She nodded slowly. Then go. You've earned your peace. Her kindness hit deeper than she knew. That night I couldn't sleep. The rain had started again. Soft against the windows. I got up to make tea, but voices drifted down the hallway, faint, urgent. Adrian and Cameron. I stood by the half-closed door and listened. We can't let him sell it, Adrian was saying. He's not thinking straight. Once he's in the nursing home, we'll have control. Cameron hesitated. You really think that's necessary? You said yourself he's lonely. He'll agree eventually. We just have to make it look like we're helping. My hand tightened around the cup, the tremor worse than ever. Every word cut deeper than any scalpel I'd ever held. I wanted to step into the room, to shout, to ask them how they could betray their own father like this. But instead, I stood still, letting the truth sink in. The sons I raised, the ones Evelyn and I gave everything to, were planning my disappearance. I went back to my room and sat in the dark. For years, I thought I'd lost everything in that crash. But I was wrong. Tonight, I lost the last thing I had left, trust. And as the rain grew heavier, I realized something else. They thought I was broken, but they had just given me a reason to remember what strength really was. The next week, Adrian showed up earlier than usual, dressed too formally, wearing that fake professional smile he used when he wanted something. Behind him were two strangers, both polite, both smiling too much. Dad, he said brightly, these are from a company that specializes in elder care. They can help with daily routines, meals, medications, all that. I just stared at him. Elder care? He nodded. It's just a visit, nothing serious. I thought we could see what options are out there. The woman stepped forward, clipboard in hand. We're from Haven Care, Mr. Morris. We focus on comfort and safety for our clients. Clients, I repeated softly. Not people? She hesitated. Well, of course. Adrian cut in. Dad, don't make this difficult. You've been alone too long. I could feel my pulse quicken, the old surgeon in me counting every beat. They walked through my house as if inspecting a property for sale, opening doors, peeking into rooms, writing notes. The walls seemed to shrink around me. Every corner of this place still carried Evelyn's presence, her touch, her laughter. Now it felt like strangers were measuring it for replacement, or for me to disappear from it. When they finally left, I sat in silence. Adrian said, Dad, think about it. You'd have company, care, safety. I looked at him and asked quietly, would I still have freedom? He didn't answer. After he drove away, I felt something inside me crack. Not anger, not yet, but something heavier. A cold understanding that my sons were no longer protecting me. They were protecting what I owned. That evening, Maya came by. She didn't ask questions. She just looked at me and knew something was wrong. I tried to make light of it, but my voice betrayed me. She set her basket down and said softly, You didn't lose your hands, Miles. You just lost a world that doesn't know how to value them anymore. Her words stopped me. For years I thought my shaking hands made me useless. But maybe the problem wasn't my hands. Maybe it was the way people saw me now. After she left, I sat at my old desk. The lamp flickered as I opened a blank notebook, the first in a decade. I used to keep journals back in the hospital, notes about surgeries, patients, the weight of life and death. Now I began again, not as a surgeon, but as a man trying to remember who he was before everything fell apart. The first line I wrote was shaky, uneven. They think I'm weak, but they forget. I've faced death before, and I'm still here. Each night after that, I wrote more. Fragments of thought, memory, regret, Evelyn's voice, Adrian's anger, Cameron's hollow smiles, they all spilled onto the page, and somewhere between the lines, I started to find myself again. On the third night, I paused mid-sentence and looked at the photograph on my desk. Evelyn in the garden, sunlight on her face. I whispered, "You'd know what to do, wouldn't you?" The tremor in my hand eased just slightly, enough to finish the line I'd been avoiding. If I can't trust my blood, then I'll trust my own judgment. Tomorrow, I'll call Parker. It wasn't just a thought anymore. It was the beginning of something else. Quiet, deliberate, irreversible. I closed the journal, feeling the pulse of my own heartbeat in the silence. For the first time in years, the house didn't feel entirely dead. It felt like it was waiting, like I was too. A few days later, they arrived together. Adrian in a pressed suit, Cameron in a denim jacket that tried to make him look casual. Their smiles were wrong, practiced, measured. "Dad," Adrian began smoothly, setting a folder on the table, "we've been thinking about how to make things easier for you." "Easier?" I asked, watching him the way I used to study an open chest, searching for the hidden wound. He pushed the folder closer. "Just a few documents, standard authorization. It'll help us manage the property while you prepare for the move." "The move?" I repeated. Cameron nodded quickly. "To the coast, remember? You said you wanted to sell the house. This will just simplify everything." I looked at the papers. Legal language, fine print. Signatures waiting for mine. Then, near the bottom margin, a phrase caught my eye. Westfield Nursing Home. I froze. "Adrian," I said quietly, "why does this mention Westfield?" He didn't answer immediately. "It's just a precaution. You need to be somewhere safe if..." "If what?" I cut in. "If I stop being convenient to you?" His tone sharpened. "That's not fair. We're trying to help you." I stood up slowly, the chair scraping against the floor. "Help me?" I said. "By tricking me into signing away my own life?" Cameron stepped forward. "Dad, please, it's not like that. You've been alone too long. We're just..." I turned to him, voice trembling but clear. "You knew about this, didn't you?" He hesitated. Adrian thought, "Don't use him as your excuse," I snapped. Adrian exhaled sharply. "Dad, you can't live like this anymore. You're isolated, depressed, unhealthy. This place is falling apart." I met his gaze. "Maybe it is. But it's my place, my choice, my life." Adrian's patience cracked. "You're being impossible. We're offering you stability, care, safety." "Care?" I laughed bitterly. "Or control?" Cameron's voice softened, but it only made it worse. "We're just worried about you." I turned toward the window, gripping the edge of the table to stop my shaking hands. "Do you remember what these hands have done?" I said quietly. "They've stopped bleeding hearts. They've brought people back from the edge of death. But now my own sons stand here, trying to bury me while I'm still breathing." Adrian looked away. "That's not what this is." "Then what is it?" I demanded. "Because it feels a lot like betrayal." The room fell silent, heavy with the kind of truth that can't be unsaid. Cameron's lips trembled. "Dad, we love you." "Love?" I whispered. "Love doesn't come with a signature line." I picked up the folder and held it out to Adrian. "Take it back." He stared at me, jaw tight. "You're making a mistake." I smiled, cold and tired. Maybe. But at least it'll be mine. I dropped the folder back onto the table, the papers scattering like fallen leaves. "Get out," I said quietly. Neither of them moved. "Get out." Adrian's mouth twitched like he wanted to say something more, an argument, a justification, but nothing came. He gathered the papers, his movements sharp, mechanical. Cameron followed him to the door, eyes low, shame flickering across his face. When the door finally closed, the silence that followed was louder than their voices. I stood there for a long time, breathing through the tremor in my hands, staring at the empty table. It wasn't the house that felt empty anymore. It was me. The day after they left, the house felt colder, not from the weather, but from what lingered in the air. Their words, their lies, the echo of their footsteps. Everything stayed behind like smoke that refused to clear. I didn't open the curtains that morning. I just sat there, staring at my trembling hands, the ones that used to save lives. Now they couldn't even hold a cup without spilling it. And yet I thought, maybe they could still hold one final decision. That afternoon, Maya came by again. She had that look, gentle but sharp, the kind that saw through everything. "You've been quiet," she said, setting down a plate of biscuits. I forced a smile. "Silence feels safer these days." She tilted her head. "Or lonelier." For a while we just sat together, the ticking clock the only sound between us. Then she said softly, "You can't fight them by sitting here, Miles. You're a surgeon. You fix things." I laughed, a bitter sound. "Not anymore. These hands are useless." She shook her head. "You didn't lose your hands. You lost trust. There's a difference." Her words landed like a diagnosis I didn't want to hear. That night I kept thinking about what she said. Fix things. Maybe I couldn't heal hearts anymore, but I could still protect what was left of mine. The next morning, I called Parker. He answered on the second ring, the same calm, precise tone I remembered from the operating room. "Miles," he said, "it's been too long." "Too long," I replied. "I need your help." He didn't ask for details. He just said, "Come by tomorrow. We'll sort it out." Parker had been more than a colleague. He was one of the few who stayed after the accident who didn't look at me with pity. When I arrived, he studied me quietly, then said, "You've already made up your mind, haven't you?" I nodded. "Yes, I want to change my will." He leaned back. "And who will it go to?" I smiled faintly. "Someone who stayed when everyone else left." He understood without another word. We spent hours drafting the new document. Every clause, every signature carefully aligned. When I signed it, the pen trembled in my hand, but the line was straight enough. It read simply, "To the one who stayed when everyone left." When I returned home, the sunset was bleeding across the walls, red and gold, like a wound healing too slowly. I went to my study, opened the drawer of my desk, and placed the envelope inside. Next to it, I left a small flash drive, a recording of the conversation with Adrian and Cameron, their words sharp and undeniable, proof of everything. Then I sat back in the chair, staring at my hands again. The tremor was worse tonight. It made the lamplight flicker across my skin like tiny waves. I whispered to the empty room, "I can't hold a scalpel anymore, but I can still cut out what's poisonous." The sound of the clock filled the silence, steady, relentless, like a heartbeat that refused to stop. For the first time in years, I felt something like control. Not over my body, not over time, but over the truth, and where it would go when I was gone. I closed the drawer gently, locking it with the small brass key Evelyn once gave me. Then I whispered her name, as if she might be somewhere in the quiet, listening. And for the briefest moment, I thought I heard her say, "You did the right thing." The morning they arrived, I knew. I heard the car before I saw it, the low hum of an engine, the sound of gravel cracking under tires. Through the window, I saw the white van, Westfield Nursing Home printed neatly on its side. It was almost poetic, the way betrayal can look so polite. Adrian stepped out first, talking to the driver, his expression composed, efficient, like a man closing a deal. Cameron followed behind, slower, uneasy, avoiding my eyes as they walked toward the door. When the bell rang, I was already sitting in the living room. My suitcase rested by the door, neatly packed. I had been waiting. Adrian walked in with that same confident smile. "Dad," he began, "they're here to help you get settled. Everything's been arranged." I nodded. "I can see that." Cameron hesitated in the doorway. "You packed?" "Yes," I said. "A few essentials. I didn't want to make things difficult." Adrian exhaled, relieved. "I'm glad you understand." I looked at both of them, studying their faces. They looked like men who believed they'd won something. For a moment, I almost pitied them. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the house keys, and held them out. "You're right," I said calmly. "Maybe your old man really does need some rest." Cameron blinked, confused. "You mean you're okay with this?" I smiled. "Why wouldn't I be? You've both worked so hard to make it happen." For the first time in years, neither of them had anything to say. Adrian took the keys from my hand, his voice lowering. "We'll take care of everything, Dad." "I'm sure you will," I replied. The men from the nursing home came in to carry my suitcase. I watched them move through the house, Evelyn's photographs, the piano, the old teacups, all of it passing behind me like a final montage of the life I was leaving behind. As we stepped outside, the air was heavy, the clouds gray and low. Cameron opened the car door for me, avoiding my gaze. I climbed in slowly, my hands trembling only slightly now. Adrian patted my shoulder through the window. "Don't worry, Dad. We'll handle things here." I met his eyes, steady and unblinking. "I know you will." The door shut. The van started to move. Through the rear window, I saw them standing together, their silhouettes growing smaller with each turn of the wheels. Halfway down the street, the driver's phone buzzed with a news alert. He didn't notice it, but I caught a glimpse of the headline reflected in the rear-view mirror. "Renowned surgeon revises will. Estate left to longtime neighbor and caregiver, Maya Morgan." Back at the house, Adrian's phone vibrated almost at the same moment. He frowned, unlocking it, his face draining of color as he read the same announcement. Cameron leaned in. "What is it?" Adrian's jaw tightened. "The will. He changed the goddamn will." There was a beat of silence before Cameron whispered, "To who?" Adrian's voice broke. "Maya, that old woman next door." He turned sharply toward the road. "Get the car." They raced back, gravel spraying under their tires, anger boiling into panic. But when they burst through the front door, the house was empty. The suitcase was gone. So was I. Only the faint ticking of the old clock filled the room, steady and unbothered, as if the house itself knew what they hadn't yet learned, that for once the choice had been mine. Maya found the letter on a quiet afternoon, resting on the wooden desk where Miles used to sit. The sunlight came through the window just the way he liked it, soft, golden, warm against the dust. For a long time, she couldn't bring herself to touch the envelope. His handwriting was unmistakable, shaky, uneven, but careful. To Maya. She opened it slowly, her fingers trembling. Inside was a single page, folded twice, and a brass key tied with a thin piece of string. The letter began simply, "Maya, thank you for seeing a man when the rest of the world saw a broken thing. You never asked for anything, yet gave me everything that mattered. Time, kindness, and a reason to still wake up. I used to believe that healing only happened in hospitals, under bright lights and steady hands. You proved it can happen in silence, in laughter, in the simple act of being there. Whatever they say about me now, remember this. I found peace before the end because you were here." She pressed the paper to her chest, unable to hold back the tears. The room smelled faintly of him. Old books, cedar, and that trace of antiseptic he never seemed to lose. As she sat there, The sound of the wind carried her back, to the afternoons in the garden when he'd kneel beside her, his hands unsteady but determined. She'd tease him gently. "You plant like a man afraid of dirt." And he'd laugh, that rare, quiet laugh of his. "I spent half my life cutting people open to save them. I think I've earned the right to be gentle with the earth." They'd walk slowly down the path, side by side, the air filled with the scent of wet soil and lilies. Evelyn's lilies, still blooming after all these years. She remembered the day he smiled for the first time in months. He had spilled tea all over his hands, then laughed at himself. "Guess I still have the surgeon's precision," he joked. Maya laughed so hard she cried, and he looked at her, eyes soft. "Don't tell anyone I can still make someone laugh," he said. "They'll think I've recovered." Now, sitting in the empty room, she could still hear that laugh echoing faintly in her mind, fragile, human, alive. She looked out the window and saw the garden below, sunlight flickering across the flowers they'd planted together. It was blooming again, fuller than ever. Maya folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. She took the brass key, holding it tight in her palm. Then she whispered, voice trembling, "You found your peace, Miles, and maybe now I'll find mine too." Outside, a soft wind moved through the lilies, carrying with it the faint sound of laughter, the kind that lingers long after the person is gone, the kind that means they never truly left. A year passed before they came. The air was cold that morning, the kind that stung but kept you awake. Adrian stood rigid beside the grave, his suit immaculate as always. Cameron lingered a few steps behind, holding a small bouquet of lilies, the same kind their mother once loved, the same kind Maya had planted behind Miles's old house. They hadn't spoken during the drive. There was nothing left to argue about. The inheritance, the property, the money, all gone. What remained was this quiet patch of earth and a headstone carved with words they hadn't written. Miles Morris, he healed hearts, even when his own was broken. Adrian stared at the inscription for a long time. The wind brushed against his face, carrying the faint scent of rain. Cameron's voice broke the silence. "He really did it, didn't he?" Adrian didn't answer. He just exhaled, slow, heavy, ashamed. Cameron placed the flowers at the base of the grave. "I keep thinking about that day," he murmured. He looked calm, like he knew something we didn't. Adrian's jaw tightened. He did. They both fell silent again, two men standing over the one who had given them everything and taught them the cost of taking too much. The cemetery was quiet except for the wind and the low hum of distant traffic. For the first time in years, the brothers didn't blame each other, didn't defend themselves. They just stood there, stripped of pretense, facing what they'd lost. Adrian finally whispered, "I thought he was weak." Cameron replied softly, "No, he was just tired of being strong for people who didn't deserve it." Adrian's eyes glistened, but he didn't let the tears fall. He only nodded. Maybe he finally got what he wanted. Cameron looked up at the sky. "Peace?" Adrian's voice was barely a breath. "Freedom." A gust of wind rustled the trees. Somewhere in that sound, soft, steady, almost familiar, another voice seemed to rise, distant but clear, calm yet unyielding. They call it a legacy, but I call it a choice, the choice of who deserves the last piece of my trust. The wind carried the words away across the field, fading into the sound of the world continuing on, a world he had left behind, but had finally, completely made peace with. And for a brief moment, standing there in silence, both sons finally understood what their father had meant all along. He hadn't left them nothing. He had left them truth.